a digital twin is the virtual digital equivalent to a physical product, okay? Which has three main prerequisites. A real space, the physical space, the virtual space, and the connection of data between the two. And as you can imagine, applied to products, right, which are much, much shorter life cycle, it's possible. So it's been, there are in manufacturing, they've been implementing digital twins for years and years. Automotive, Tesla has a digital twin of every single car, right? But for our built assets, that's the challenge. How can we possibly apply, the benefits, and how can we, implement digital twins in our built assets, right? And then is when obviously the challenge comes in our industry.
Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a great conversation with Cristina Savian, the founder of BeWise, an international consultancy focused on driving the adoption of innovative technology in the construction and property industries across Europe, US, and Australia. Cristina tells us about her background in civil engineering and technology in Italy, the UK, and now Australia, as well as her passion for digital twins. We start with a bit of a digital twin 101 explanation, and Cristina tells us how she works in this space. We discuss how digital twins fits into the smart community space and the benefits of digital twins, as well as some of the use cases of how digital twins can help in the areas of mobility and construction. Cristina and I then talk about the challenges of working out what data is worth collecting for digital twins, as well as the access, management, and governance of that data. We finish our chat discussing how the pandemic has shifted some of the trends in our cities and what the cities of the future might look like. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Cristina. How are you today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Let's just jump straight into it. Can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Okay, so let's start from, where am I from and where is my funny accent from? So I was born in north of Italy, in a town called Turin. So is northwest of Italy. At the bottom of the mountains. So I started my career in 1998. I qualified in Italy. There is this qualification, it's a bit of like building land surveying. And I always been fascinated by the built environment and always kind of been the boy in the house. I'm the oldest of three sisters. And yes, that's what always fascinated me. I started working, initially was buildings, but actually I was fascinated by open spaces. So I actually started working immediately as a land surveyor, working in the design of big freeways, one of big freeways in north of Italy. So, and then I moved to the local authorities, doing a lot of traffic management, studying in the evening. And in 2005, I actually moved to London. I started working for the local authorities there. Started doing a master's in civil engineering. At the time, I had just finished my degree in Italy. And I just carried on. I worked into basically traffic engineering, control parking zones. Then in 2012, I was in London. There were the Olympics. So I actually had the pleasure of working for the London Olympics. I was one of the transport managers of Greenwich Park venue. So looking after all the traffic management and parking. And there was a lot of work. The biggest team I ever managed it was my early 30s. So yes, it was really challenging. And after that, I always been a technologist. So a few years earlier, I was implementing some of the solutions while I was working the local authorities there. And Autodesk had hunted me. And I started working in technical pre-sales for North Europe. I had a traveling job, which these days, it sounds really strange to say. but I was doing up to 2, 3, 4 countries a week. So just jumping from one cities to another, advising customers, mostly civil infrastructure customers, on how to implement technology in their businesses. And then 3 years ago, I started my own business. And now I work with 2 types of clients. So one side, I have the startups that they have new tech for the construction industry. And then on the other side, I have the big, large organizations that needs to innovate and they really want to do more. But to answer your question, what are you really passionate about? So yes, these days, it's about digital twins and what they can do as, for us to help us to design, build, and operate our built assets. And it's kind of like a strange story because it kind of started for a personal reason. So on the 14th of August, 2018, the Morandi Bridge in north of Italy collapsed unexpectedly. The day I was in London, it really touched me. I just could not accept that something like this could have happened and any of my family member could have been on the bridge. And it just broke my heart. I just say, this is just unacceptable because I've been working and I've been trying to, as an innovator and trying to digitize this industry. And this is just unacceptable because you immediately accept that what went wrong was mismanagement and how our infrastructures, it's failing, okay, global. We know that. Who works in the industry already knows that. But we see that coming. We monitor the infrastructure. We know when, and we can't prevent something like this from happening, right? So I start working and researching on what could have prevented that, right? What we could have done differently. And then is when I started looking into and hearing about digital twins, right? And for any person that is new in this topic, so do you actually know? I'm sure you heard a lot about it. Do you actually know what a digital twin is?
Yeah, give us the 101 for all of our audience. Because there may be some people, there's lots of talk about digital twins. And I think, but there also will be a lot of people in the audience. This is the first time they've heard digital twins. So give us the 101.
So the terminology itself was actually defined by Dr. Michael Griff from the University of Michigan in 2003. So has been around for quite some time. And you're like, what? We just heard about it, right? So how is that possible? So it actually came from the manufacturing industry. So Dr. Griff started, obviously, define this terminology, and he defined it as a digital twin is the virtual digital equivalent to a physical product, okay? Which has 3 main prerequisites: a real space, the physical space, the virtual space, and the connection of data between the two. And as you can imagine, applied to products, right, which are much, much shorter life cycle, it's possible. So it's been, there are manufacturers, they've been implementing digital twins for years and years. Automotive, Tesla has a digital twin of every single car, right? But for our built assets, that's the challenge. How can we possibly apply, the benefits, and how can we, implement digital twins in our built assets, right? And then is when obviously the challenge comes in our industry. The way and at the moment, in the last 2 years, it kind of like exploded. So during my research, I got invited at the UCL Barton School of Construction to do an evening lecture. And that was in December 18. So a few months after the collapse of the bridge. And I decided to do it on digital twinning because I was researching on the topic. I thought it was interesting for them to hear about it. And then little I knew that week, the Gemini principles in UK were published, which if you never heard of what basically Gemini principle are, is a group of values set out by the Centre of Digital Britain to aid the development of a national digital twin, national, which the idea means like collecting and linking a lot of little digital twins together, right? With the goal to improve the overall UK infrastructure, right? The UK is investing like Australia, billions, in infrastructures and design and build digitally before we build, physically, trying to understand a bit better on how we're gonna design, build and operate our big assets is certainly, of interest. So obviously, since then, and there was not really much on this topic. There were no really research on the topic on how to apply digital twins for the built environment. A few months later, I was at the House of Parliament in UK, in London, where they asked me, how do you create a digital twin of, our parliamentary state? And I say, okay, people are asking me how to do this. I really need to know a lot more. And I ended up publishing white paper, one of the first pieces of documents we have of pointing out the digital, what digital twins can do for our built environment. And since then, it's been my life for the last few years. I don't talk about anything else. And the main focus at the moment I do is, I focus on supporting customers on how do you implement digital twins for our built assets.
Yeah, I want to let's dive into digital twins in a second, but let's just bring up a little bit to smart communities. How do digital twins fit into these, smart cities and smart communities that we're all talking about?
So the way I always explain, at the moment, the terminology is used to refer to many different things, and people see digital twins in a very different way. Here, what we have is the ability, we have technology evolutions in the way for as a construction professions, we all started from the drawing boards, most of us, right? Who is at least in the 40s, like me. And then we moved to, to design, digitally. And the way I see digital twins is just a technology, the next level of technology evolution, right? So we can do, technology has advanced, we can do a lot better, and we can do a lot better with our built assets. So the ability to gather. So as you know, during our construction life cycle, we collect a lot of digital data, which is already happening, right? If we structure this data across the entire life cycle up to, the point of operation and maintenance, and at the moment, what happens, a lot of data get collected, but then once the asset is built, is either maintained or is not handed over, right? The opportunity we have here is gather this information, structure this information, analyze this information in a meaningful way, so we can, think about the design. Simple example, like a design standards. It takes years and years and years. We build our built assets because it's based on standards. To change any standards, it takes years and years and years. What about if we gather this data on how actually the spaces are used, and we can immediately feedback and improve. This is what we learn. Actually, we have to change. Yeah, think about this year. The pandemic has completely changed our operation and maintenance, our built assets, right? But how are we actually, and the life cycle is completely changed. Some of them, there needs to be, change destination of use. They need to be used, stuff different way. The ability to have data, the ability to have a digital virtual representation with not necessarily, and I think this is something I've really learned a lot. Not necessarily we are talking about fancy 3D models where you can just click and, connect into the, physical and switching things and oftentimes it's just a virtual, representation, the ability to collect data about our built assets in like remote environment, feeds live, it gives back, is connected. You have a continuous cycle of information that basically tells you, what you want to know, right? And if we gather all this information, think about, one building, then we collect the data of multiple buildings, then we have city level, right? Immediately we can start benchmarking, right? And optimize the performance of the buildings, of the cities, and feed it back. And at the end of the day, we are construction professionals, but we are ultimately the users of our built environments, because we live in, buildings, because we take, roads to go from point A to B, because we use the public service, service building. So ultimately, we are the beneficiary of digital twinning, right? We are the beneficiary that technology has advanced. We can use this now of technology to know more about how our assets are built and how they're used. And ultimately, everyone will benefit, because ultimately we can reduce the way we the cost, the overall cost. We can have a better, service. I think the opportunities are limitless. It's more the justification, right? Because collection of data, organization of data is still a challenging, task. And I always see the digital twins opportunity is about the use case and what you want to do, because you can't just do everything, right?
Yeah, and I see it as you're talking about, like, the community is the beneficiary essentially, but also you will see benefits within local government agency or state, all government agencies that are looking after any kind of asset, because they'll have more information about that asset and be able to make better decisions essentially, and hopefully avoid things like assets failing earlier than expected, or even extending life of assets based on use rather than just, ongoing maintenance can be targeted rather than just mandatory, intervals. And so you can better manage your assets and that type of thing as well. But also, like you were talking about, the as constructed kind of, I'm thinking of a road, for example. Okay, well, this is what it was supposed to look like. This is how we built it. Actually being able to update that, so then when people are maintaining it, then you have an accurate record, which, seems fairly like a good thing to have, an accurate record of what that asset has been through, but then ongoing as well. I'm just curious, can you give some examples of some of the data streams that you would see feeding into digital twins and how they actually would be collected as well?
Yeah, so there are different, as I say, the digital twins, because as professionals we don't work across the entire life cycle. Mostly, really, the asset owner at the end has an interest or keeps an eye, as good, bad, some like more details and a bit of less detail way across the life cycle. But as a construction professional, we'll really just work on a very tiny bit. Whatever you're a designer, you do design, or you do the construction, or you do the operational maintenance. So what we have here is some challenges of what type of data we want to connect, and what type of data we want to gather, what type of we want to structure, right? And what makes sense. The way I always see is I strongly believe the ultimately interest is to mandate the use of digital twins are the asset owner, because it's the person where, is more interested in maintaining the asset in a very long, for a very long time. So from their regards, it's about what is the business needs, what is important for me, start analyzing what are the biggest costs, what are the biggest challenges, what has failed in the past, and what the business is, what you want to improve, right? And then going back and say, okay, some of the ideas, it depends obviously, and the approach tends to be slightly different wherever you're doing a new infrastructure, for example, or something built, which is already existing. So you can understand. So it depends on the life cycle, and depends, for example, in the design space, you're like, okay, you know what? I know ultimately my data and everything I do will be feedback, has the potential to be feedback and reuse during operational maintenance. Think about I don't know in Australia how much was on the news about the Grenfell Tower, right, in London, right? And we understand immediately how that records on the materials that were used kind of like got lost track, right? It was very, very challenging to understand, during obviously the refurbishment phase, what was the right thing to do and how many things went wrong right there, right? So there was no really accurate, and I don't know if you ever read the report, but it also really talks about the golden thread, the golden thread of this information. So I think it's about understanding what it's the data that is important ultimately to the asset owner. Understand if, for example, during the design phase, you don't have a physical asset yet, right? So at the moment, there is a lot of debate: can we really call it a digital twin? Because it's just a virtual replica and it's not really connected to our built assets. So maybe it's just a virtual replica. But many people refer it as a digital twin, for example. So, and to be honest, as long as we understand what it is, it doesn't really matter. So during the design phase, you can say, you know what, I know ultimately I'm going to start linking and I'm going to structure this information so it can be reused later on. During the design phase, the construction phase, you start maintaining this data. Obviously, there needs to be information management plan on what is important and what we need to gather. And then ultimately, this information is handed over and used during asset operation and maintenance to analyze, disparate parts of the buildings. Definitely, the biggest benefits that the digital twin is exactly on the operational phase, and when you really need to maintain, you need to understand more and better and have insights on our built assets, because it's the longest life cycle. And you can gather the information in many different ways. Obviously, now we have IoT devices, we have a lot of sensors data, which obviously have a cost, and this is where also you have the debate, and you need to balance is what it's worth collecting, what is not worth collecting, right? We also have the ability, I know there are some examples where for some very complex facilities, they actually tend to change a lot. They're trying to think, so you know what, this scanning is quite inexpensive these days. So what about if we actually have regular records, right, of our built assets, and then we can always go back, right, if we need that. Has some kind of like colligation, it's still kind of linked. If you create this link, I think sometimes definitely the original definition it talks about near real time. I think it's the challenging part of adopting this terminology and this type of concept to our built assets. It's near real time for us might be very difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I was going to say that the use case is really important, right? And so I'm wondering if you can, obviously we're talking about assets and maintenance and that type of thing. I've been having a lot of conversations around transport assets, for example, and what a digital twin how they would be benefit by operating transport, say a new network of, public transport or whatever, and how would a digital twin help with the operation and maintenance of that? Do you have any thoughts on mobility, knowing that your background is in that space, and how digital twins can help?
I think it depends. I'm new to Australia, so I don't know if it's the way you work and the type of records of our built assets is the same of how it's kept in Europe, right? And in UK. My experience is that billions of digital data is built, it's created every single day. Nothing is structured, nothing is linked together, and nothing is reused during operation and maintenance. And most of the operation and maintenance is exactly as that. It's kind of like that's how we tend to do things. That's how we tend to maintain the asset. It's about learning and then feeding back, right? But we know that there is this huge delay of lesson learned that gets feedback. So the ability to add sensors to our structure. So for example, there is a very interesting piece of research at the Center of Smart Infrastructure in Cambridge that basically they start putting sensors on bridges, right? And start to understand, even analyzing if, for example, that bridge was over-constructed, right? So it never really used how it's supposed to be designed. And actually, there was a lot of waste of material in that bridge because it was miscalculated. So, but then of course, it was built on the standard, right? So from the design perspective, the ability to have a virtual representation of our built asset, link it to the physical asset, understand a bit more on how it's used, can help us to build better assets. So if you think about our infrastructure, the next type of infrastructure is going to be has the potential to be better. Then we can have. It depends of the records that at the moment they are kept. I remember most of the time if we had to change anything, right, on the local network, in Greenwich where I was working, we had to go and do a site visit, right? But if you think about also, now during the pandemic, It's very challenging to do that. We can't really do that. So having a virtual representation, which we know might not be 100% accurate, but it's much better than what we don't have, can help us to make those, to start working and making those decisions, start analyzing and trying to find the answer that we have. I think one of the issues that we have is this new trend came to our market, and there is such a buzz, and there is like such big high expectations on how digital twins can change our cities, and without even really understanding that it's not just about buying a software and visualizing everything fast in 3D. It's about the data is behind. We don't make decisions on fancy 3D models. We make decisions on hard data and numbers. The problem is the numbers that we have are bad and they're not accurate. So it's about embracing the digital twin opportunity on trying to have more accurate data, because for what is worth collecting, we will have sensors we can attach. We can even have real data. So it's about having better data, better information to enable better decision making. I think the research is still, it's still very early days to answer the question is what is worth collecting, because for technology, it's advancing very fast, but there is a price and a cost of collecting and maintaining that information, which is also what prevented us from keeping up with accurate data up to date. It's not just laziness. It's not just public, if we're talking about public processes that they tend not to be perfect. It's the fact that this is a challenge. There is a cost, associated to that. And technology can help us. Definitely, we can have sensor data. We can have create that loop, right, of creating these digital records that can be reused, later on if we need to, because we realize, what, that it will cost us more not to have that information, and will cost us more to collect it after, right, and lose it after. So
yeah, and I think it's like you talk a lot about the data, and so it's actually about setting up those data frameworks, setting up the governance, who's going to look after this stuff, and then identifying the use cases.
Want the data. He also wants the data. That's probably biggest challenge ever. At the moment, what happens, most of the digital data is on the company software system. If you ask our asset owner, they don't necessarily know where the data is. They don't own the data. It's locked in somewhere, and only really who is holding that information even knows what is there. But this is not for the benefits of the asset owner. It's not for the benefits of our communities. So there is the work of the Gemini principles, for example, in UK, actually comes out of the report of data for the public good, which is a very, very, I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's a very, very interesting piece of research, and on how we can make, how data can help us, to create a better world, right? And our better cities and our better communities. As we know, it's a very country-based approach. Some countries are very transparent on the data is available and make it available to everyone, to the public, also to the private for leveraging information. We're talking, simple things like planning applications and so on, right? Some other countries, you don't find any type of records, right? But yes, ultimately, the goal is create better communities, better cities, and better built environment.
Okay, well, let's flick to the future and talk about some of the emerging trends. And, we might say that digital twin is the emerging trend we want to talk about. But yeah, what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
Well, this is there are different, if you're talking just to construction, there are definitely AI, machine learning, and all data analysis of this big data. Yeah. And make sense of it is definitely a big thing. And I think we are just underestimating on how much there is out there about us. And I think we talk about, but it's quite, scary. And I was actually having this conversation. So I started I'm very active on Clubhouse, and now I run regular rooms talking about digital twins. And this morning we're actually doing one in Italian, and is how do you expect the cities 2050 to look like? So what do you expect? And I think one of the things that came out of that is exactly all these emerging trends. Drones. Drones could make, I don't know, our infrastructure completely useless. We might not even have to fix and refurbish our infrastructure because we'll be flying in a few years' time. Because we will have drones, popping in our doorstep, and we don't even have to move from point A to B. That could be completely disrupt, right? How we're built environment, how we do things. So the pandemic has already kind of shifted, some of the trends and the fact that how we use our cities. And will this be a lasting impact? One of the other things that came up this morning is people will be willing to live in a completely different, outside the cities, because necessarily they have to commute anymore or not as many days a week. At the same time, one of the things is connectivity. Do we know about Elon Musk? People know actually about Elon Musk and how many satellites it's shooting to the sky, and the Starlink and this big nectar that we're gonna have on top of our heads. Do we understand the potentials in terms of, yes, for our built assets, we will have better connectivity, 5G, right? We will have all of these billions and billions and billions of data that we need to analyze. There is a lot of trends, and the technology is moving very, very, very fast. I think it's very difficult to predict, I think, what our cities will look like, because if you think about it, when we were little, we probably would never have thought that 2020 would have been the year where we saw a pandemic, and all of us this year changed everything, right, for a majority of the world. So it's very difficult, I think, to predict, and who knows?
Yeah, and I think it's important to, talking about drones and even Starlink connecting regional areas and that type of thing, whether it's potential. But I don't know, I think particularly for drones, it's us getting involved in the conversation to shape what we want that to look like. Do we want to be cruising around and not have a use for our cities and not connecting with people anymore because we're all in our individual pods or whatever the case may be? Or is it going to increase inequities because I might be able to afford a helicopter? Well, essentially that's what a drone is, right? It's a cheaper electric helicopter. But yeah, then does it just separate? We leave people in congestion down the bottom, and then the other people can fly up above. And I think that's where, and we were talking about earlier, starting this podcast was really about trying to have those conversations and get people involved in them, because it's not set in stone exactly like you said as well. But let's get involved and shape what we want our places to look like. I think it's important.
I think the challenge we have is it technology serving people? And all of these great new technology trends, because at the end of the day, it's about the people. And I think we forget sometimes that we need to design the cities for us and putting us in the center. And I think sometimes too often we forget about that. So the trends that probably are going to, yes, technologies and, and obviously there are big businesses behind, right? So it depends what people buy, and what people buy will stick and the rest will go. We thought video cassettes were going to be, big. They're gone already, right? So there is something new. So who knows how many new technology we're going to see, and if they're going to stick, who knows? Maybe you're right. Drones are not going to stick around. But think about, we need to start designing like these landing things in every, house. We need to start, changing, everything. Do people want that? Some people will. Some people say, you know what? I don't want that. I actually don't want to have millions of drones over my head or dropping on, on someone's head at any one time. But on the bigger picture is we could have that as well with Starlink, right? Who knows about these millions of satellites, in the sky? Well, it's kind of like scary, right? But I think it's about, yes, getting involved in the conversation and understand what suits you and what it doesn't. Because I think sometimes as a human being, we forget that ultimately we are the decision. We think a lot of is imposed on us, and it's true. But sometimes it's our decision. You are decision makers, because if we don't buy it, there is no market for it. So if we don't like something, sometimes it's okay. Let's just say no to it.
Well, it's been so great to chat with you, Cristina. I feel like we could talk for a long time. I just have one last question, which is how can people connect with you?
So I have my own website, which is www.b-wise.xyz, actually. I'm keeping and which is built environment wise. I have my own website where actually I collect all the talks, the videos, the articles. I run my own blog on acbusiness.com, where you can see a lot of articles. I share a lot of experience on implementing the reality of implementing digital twins, which is still challenging, and the challenges in that. So you can find out that, and that is CristinaSavian.com. And I run rooms on Clubhouse. I have my own club, which is called House of Digital Twins. I don't know how familiar you are with House of Cards series, but as a construction professional, sometimes I really feel like I'm in the middle of the House of Cards plot. So a few months ago, I decided to publish this article, and less than 3 weeks ago, I opened the same club on Clubhouse, and the talks are actually in every language. The aim is to have talks in rooms in every language. At the moment, there are English, Italian, and German. And as we're building up, hopefully we can have more. But yes, if you're on Clubhouse, please join the discussion and just understand, what we can do now with technology.
Yeah, cool. We'll put all the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. Thank you again for joining me on the Smart Community Podcast. And yeah, look forward to our next conversation. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
The Smart Community Podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.